All right, so our speaker today is also our spiritual leader here at the church, and a great example of humor and humility wrapped in one nice, calm, and inspirational package. And so we're happy to have Reverend Brian Walker as our speaker today.
So a man's driving across a bridge, and he sees somebody on the other side of the rail, looking perilously over the edge. So, fearing the worst and being a Christian, he pulls over, he climbs over the bridge rail, and he approaches him, says, what's going on? And the guy says, my wife left me, I lost my job. He said, I don't have any reason to live anymore. And so the Christian says, well, that sounds really terrible. He says, when I go through some rough patches in life, I find it's helpful to go to church. And so the Christian says to him, so you ever go to church? And the guy says, yeah. And so the Christian says, Catholic or Protestant? And the guy says, Protestant. He goes, me too. He says, what denomination? And so the guy says, Baptist. He goes, me too. So is that Northern Baptist or Southern Baptist? And the guy says, Northern Baptist. Me too. So he said, is that conservative Northern Baptist or liberal Northern Baptist? And the guy says, conservative Northern Baptist. And the guy says, me too. And so then the Christian says to him, is that conservative Northern Baptist Great Lakes region or the Eastern region? And the guy says, conservative Northern Baptist Great Lakes region. And the guy goes, me too. And so then the Christian says, is that conservative Northern Baptist Great Lakes region the conference of 1879, or Northern Baptist Great Lakes region, the conference of 1912? And so the guy goes, it's Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes region, 1879. So the Christian's eyes get big. He pushes him off and he says, die, heretic! So this is a book that's titled Handbook of Denominations in the United States. It's over 300 pages, hundreds of denominations, and so there's a lot of different ideas about following what Jesus taught. And if you check into Christian history, some people had strong feelings about it, as this little story demonstrates. But I mean, there are wars and crusades and you name it, and there's all kinds of crazy stuff going on. So the title of my talk is, what did Jesus really teach? What did Jesus really teach? And so if you look at this from an historical perspective, it's challenging to figure out, because Jesus lived a long time ago. To the best of our knowledge, he did not have a Facebook page, not on TikTok, no social media whatsoever. He didn't write anything that we know of, that's anything that's left. And so there's no other mention of him in non-Jewish sources. There's one Jewish historian who wrote about him, wrote a few lines, Josephus, but other than that, we don't have any other outside information about him. So So what we're left with is the scriptures, the New Testament, and so basically the stuff that's right about Jesus is the Gospels. Okay? And so you're probably thinking, well, we got these great eyewitness accounts, so, we got some good juicy stuff here. Yeah, not so much. The Gospels were written, most scholars are pretty firm on this, in the last third of the first century. So somewhere 70 to 100 in the Common Era. So they estimate that Jesus was crucified around 30 in the Common Era, okay, CE. So it's like at least 2 generations away that these Gospels were written. And that's the earliest one. They think the latest one was probably written in the 90s, which would be like 3 generations. Now, probably most of you are familiar with that little phone game where you tell a little something in somebody's ear and it goes around. So these are oral traditions that are be taken down. And so in addition to which, these were people who saw Jesus as their Savior. So they had a pretty favorable view of who he was. So we're not getting any kind of critical kind of story here. So in addition to which, there were a lot of different people who had different ideas about what Jesus meant and what all the different ideas and stories about him were. So there are a lot of different groups that are saying, yeah, we follow Jesus' teachings, but they do really different things. So eventually, I know you know all what happens, that one of the Roman emperors decides that he has a conversion experience. He says, I'm Christian now, and he gets all these people together and says, okay, look, we're going to have this council and we're going to get all of this sorted out so that we get the real truth. And so they go through all this stuff and they figure out, okay, this is what we believe. And they come up with these creeds and they say, all you other folks, and there were a lot of other folks, you're heretics. This is what Jesus really taught, and you're heretics. So, there still were, after that, we got the Orthodox teachings. Orthodox means kind of, the right way of thinking. So anyway, but after that had gone on for about 1,000 years, so there was the first major break, which was the Orthodox, the folks in the East, they broke off and they didn't want to honor the Pope. And so we have all our Orthodox churches, Greek Orthodox and all Russian Orthodox. And so that was the first major split. And then, of course, a few centuries later, you had Martin Luther, who was tapping up his 95 Theses on the Wittenberg Wall. And then you get the Protestant Reformation. And then, Katie barred the door. We got this. We have a lot of folks thinking, yes, we've got the right teaching. So you've got Roman Catholics and Greek Orthodox and Presbyterians and Quakers and Appalachian snake handlers. You familiar with the Appalachian snake handlers? That comes from the Bible. So people have a lot of different ideas about what this is all about. So I am getting my information from the Bible. So let's look at this particular section of Luke, where a lawyer says to Jesus, "Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" And so Jesus says, "What is it written in the law? How do you read it?" And so the lawyer answers, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." And Jesus replies, "You have answered correctly. Do this, and you will live." But the lawyer wasn't quite satisfied with that. He said, "So, who's my neighbor?" And Jesus, as he was wont to do, responded with a parable. And he said, "Well, there's a guy going down from Jerusalem down to Jericho, and he is set upon by robbers who beat him, strip him, leave him for half dead. And so a priest and a Levite come by, they cross the other side, and they walk on by. But Jesus says, a Samaritan sees him, goes over, treats his wounds, takes him to an inn, and tells the innkeeper, take care of him, I'll be back and I'll pay for whatever you paid for, or whatever it cost you." And so Jesus says, "So who do you think is this guy's neighbor?" And the guy says, "The guy who showed him mercy." And Jesus says, "Go and do likewise. Go and do likewise." So now, to really get the full impact of what this parable is about, you need to understand that Samaritans were hated by the Jews. They were considered the enemy. It's like if you went into the fully segregationist South and you asked, Jesus, who my neighbor is, and he says, "Yeah, this black man here." So it's very impactful to say, yeah, this Samaritan is the one who is acting like his neighbor. So we can look at what this means as we are wont to do in our tradition metaphysically, and see that the traveler could represent each one of us as we go through life. And his particular journey is going from Jerusalem, which is a place that's considered to be of high consciousness, to Jericho, which is a place that could represent more materialistic kind of aspects of our life. And kind of a descent from spiritual awareness into a more earthly kind of existence. And so the robbers are anything that keeps us into this really human place and the lower kind of human kind of existence. So whether it's negative thoughts or limiting beliefs, or in this case, as with the priest and the Levite, any kind of religious practices that are narrow and that keep us from really being who we truly are. And the Samaritan, of course, could represent the Christ part of us, our eternal self, that part of us that's connected to everything and everyone and shows naturally mercy and compassion. So it's very clear that by this parable that Jesus is teaching that there are no barriers and there are no social limitations to the human family, that we're all connected in the most divine ways. And so one of the things that when we hear a parable like that, we might consider ourselves. What are the robbers in my own life? What is it that keeps me from being my fullest expression of that Good Samaritan kind of energy? What is it that I can do to bring forth that in me? And so that's something that you could contemplate as we think about what it is that Jesus really taught, how you can reflect on what these things mean to me. Which I will actually be doing in the workshop this afternoon. We'll be exploring more of this in a deeper kind of way. And so there'll be a quiz on the denominations when we're done. So you'll really know this very thoroughly. So I want to share with you also what I consider to be a modern parable that can also reflect for us what Jesus really taught. So there's a guy driving down the road, and his car breaks down. He's out in the country. He wanders around. He finds a monastery. So he goes up and he knocks on the door. And, they welcome him in. He tells them the problem. He says, and so they say, well, we'll help you out. And so he spends the night. They feed him dinner, simple, nutritious, delicious meal. And they have a mechanic there, fixes his car. So he's spending the night there. And during the night, he hears this very haunting sound. It is really gets to the very core of his being. It's like, if you're familiar with the story of Ulysses, like the sirens, if you've seen the movie or you know the story, that they sail through these rocks where the sirens call out and it drives the sailors crazy. And Ulysses has himself strapped to the mast because he wants to hear these things, but he doesn't want to go crazy like everybody does because then the ships wreck. So anyway, it's that kind of powerful kind of sound. And so he gets up in the morning and he sees the monks and he goes, God, I heard this amazing sound last night. It just was so haunting. What was that? And so the monks tell him, sorry, we can't tell you that. You're not a monk. And so he goes, oh man, that is so, he is just really very sad, but he gets in his car and he drives off. But this haunting sound is just, it just can't shake it. He tries to go on with his life, but he can't make it. And so he spends some months trying to live his life, but he can't do it. And so he goes back to the monastery and he says, I've got to find out what that is. What do I need to do to become a monk? And so they tell him, you need to learn and be able to tell us how many blades of grass and how many grains of sand there are on the planet. So you need to travel the earth. And so the guy leaves. Years and years later, he comes back. He's a grizzled old man. He knocks on the door. And he says, I want to become a monk. So they gather together their circle. And they ask him the question. So, how many blades of grass are there? And how many grains of sand? And the guy says, only God knows the answer to that question. Because the world is in a dynamic condition where things are changing all the time. He says, the only thing that a person can know is really to learn about the deepest essential part of themselves. And even that only through very rigorous self-examination and ways to see through how we deceive ourselves. And in addition, to live a life dedicated to the compassionate service of others. And the head monk says, you're a monk. And so they take him downstairs where there's a wooden door. And they give him a key. So he puts the key in, opens the door. There's another door. A brass door. So they give him a brass key. He opens the door. There's another door. So they go through the ruby door and the pearl door and the diamond door. Finally, they get to the gold door. He gets the gold key. Puts it in there. He opens the door. Falls down on his knees. He can't believe what he sees. Do you know what's making the noise? I can't tell you. You're not a monk.